Thank you, Professor Nityanand and Nathananda, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you as usual. And I've been joining this event for a number of years, and I'd also like to greet Professor Muchkund Dubey. I'm feeling very uncomfortable occupying his seat in this discussion. Of course, not to speak of the wonderful initial thoughts that he always gives, and which help us in sort of directing the discussion in this very important event that CSD organizes. I really hope, sir, you get well soon and speedy recovery, sir. And I hope that at some point you'll be able to speak and give us your considered views, and we're really looking forward to that. So, so what I will do is that I'll make some initial comments on the budget, and then give the floor to the esteemed colleagues who are in the panel, and finally, in the summing up, I'll say a few more things based on what the inputs are from all our fellow panelists. Now, I think Professor Nityananda has given a very good overview, I would say, of the budget, and the whole. I think the struggle between the long term and the short term, which we see in the budget, that there is a long term perspective, and whenever one looks at the long term and that kind of a long term, then one is of course reminded of Keynes's very famous quip that in the long run we are all dead, and so that is one issue that we need to sort of look at. And of course, he pointed to the numerous short-term issues, the struggle that the Indian economy has been facing, just not in the past 2 years. And that's the important part that he also mentioned. That we have been actually, even before the pandemic struck us, we had been on a downturn. And so really, if you look at, so it's very important to see what your pre-COVID sort of reference point is. So if your pre-COVID reference point is 1920, then, as economists, we always say that this is not a normal year. So we shouldn't actually compare what's going on today with 1920, because 1920 was not a normal year. We all know what the growth, what kind of growth was registered in 1920. Initially, we heard that the growth was in excess of 4%. Last year, it was revised down to 4% exactly. And in the estimates that the NSO provided a day before the budget was presented, we heard that in 1920, the Indian economy grew by 3.7%. So if you look at the growth trends, there's been a sharp decline from something about 6.8% in 17-18 down to 3.7% in 1920. So obviously, this comparison with 1920 is not correct. If you expect the Indian economy to perform as it did earlier, when the expectations was that the economy will grow by at least 7%. This is what Mr. Arun Jaitley used to constantly remind us, that we have to grow by at least 7%. And the target was that Indian economy should become a 5 trillion economy in those days, in 5 years, and 10 trillion economy in 10 years. So the point I'm making is that you really can't achieve those $5 trillion and $10 trillion targets in quick time. You have to again wait for at least the medium term. If suppose we get stuck at this level of growth the low growth trajectory. Now, what's holding us back? So quite obviously there are pain points, and we know that recovery has been extremely uneven. Nitya pointed this out. Except agriculture, which has been growing steadily, it has been, which is quite remarkable, given the performance of Indian agriculture in the past. And so the good rainfall that we have been having consistently for the past few years have helped the sector. And despite the disruption that we saw for more than a year, agriculture has registered steady growth. But that's not the case with manufacturing, and manufacturing has been, at best registering a choppy growth, especially in the last few months for which we have the data. So I was looking at the data for the IIP for November, which is the last set of numbers we have, November 21. And in November 21, the manufacturing sector grew by less than 1%. So there are issues there. We still don't know what is the situation of the MSME sector, especially the micro sector. The informal sector. We still don't have any idea. And why I say this is that this is the sector which was affected the most. The disruption was the most in the MSME sector. The job losses were the highest here. And we still don't know what is the situation. All that we know is that because of the disruptions in the labor market that we have, the domestic demand, consumption demand hasn't actually recovered. And this is an admission that has been made even in the economic survey. That consumption demand, which is actually the driver of the Indian economy, has remained subdued. And again, this is vis-a-vis the 1920. So again, we are looking at a low base period, where so that again, as I said earlier, that comparison with a less than normal year is not quite appropriate. See, why I'm repeating this thing, because I think we expect the economy to do much better, and for the betterment of the citizens of this country, the economy has to do much better. So we shouldn't be satisfied with these kinds of numbers that we are seeing today. One set of numbers that I see regularly, and it's gives a fair indicator as to where the citizens of this country are, or the perception of the citizens of this country regarding the economy, is the bi-monthly consumer confidence survey that RBI publishes. And the latest set of numbers were published last month in January. And so these relate to the survey done in December 2021. And here again, we see that, the perception among the public, those who have been sort of the respondents, isn't showing, good kind of results. So for instance, the perceptions and expectations on the general economic situation in January 21. So this is January 21 numbers. The survey was for December. It says that 72.2% of the respondents have said that the general economic situation has actually worsened. And in May 20, in the height of the pandemic, May, July, the percentage was about 74 to 77%. So from 77, you have improved to 72. So you don't see a perceptible jump in the way the consumers are viewing the the present situation. Similarly, on the expectations of employment, 75% of the people say that it is worsened. And again, in July 2020, this number was 78%. So, like I was saying that, the labor market disruption is getting clearly reflected in these numbers. And similarly, everyone is like, most people, 89% people expect that prices are going to be rising. There'll be higher prices. And on the expectations of income, about 61% people are saying that this is actually income has actually decreased. So we get an idea from these numbers that the present situation is not really something that we can say that we have completely recovered from the crisis. And now this perception is important. I think for the government to recognize that we are still not out of the crisis is important, because then the measures that the government takes, and especially the fiscal policy incentives that the government takes, would be in keeping with what the actual situation of the country is at this point in time. And there I feel that there has been a certain amount of, a gap between what we think, many of us think, and what possibly, the finance minister's budget has reflected. I think the finance minister budget reflects that we have actually moved on. So let me say a few things about the capital expenditure. Of course, it's echo Nitya's thoughts in saying that, of course, all of us like to see increase in capital expenditure, and capital expenditure has been increased by more than 24% if you're comparing the budget estimates with the revised estimates. And I think that's a fair kind of comparison to make. Now, will this number hold itself? Will the government be able to spend this kind of an amount on make this kind of a capital expenditure, given the fact that it wants to keep the fiscal deficit, fixed at about 6% or thereabouts. Now, why I say this is that I did some back of the envelope calculations looking at of the expenditure numbers. Now, what I find is that the revenue expenditure has increased, or the proposal is to increase the revenue expenditure by just over 4%. So capital expenditure increases by 24%, the revenue expenditure increases by 4%. And this 4% number is actually a decline in real terms, because if you look at the current rate of inflation and the number that has been assumed by the government in providing us with the GDP estimates, which came on 31st of January, according to the government, the inflation is more than 8%, 8.5%, if I'm not mistaken. And if you look at from the gross capital formation, if you look at the inflation they expect for capital goods, it's about 14%. Yeah. So if you put all these numbers into the bucket, and then you try to understand where we are in terms of expenditure, I feel that given the low expenditure on allocations on revenue, and the anxiety to keep the fiscal deficit fixed at about 6% or thereabouts, there could be a shift of funds away from capital expenditure to revenue, because you can't actually postpone revenue expenditure. Most of that in terms of salaries and other things, so you can't really postpone that. And so that's an issue that is important. That whether this number of capital expenditure is going to sustain itself, and of course the 24%, if you look at it in real terms, it comes down to about 10%, which is also not bad actually. Yeah, but this is the issue. Now, Nitya also mentioned that agriculture, and we are expecting the government to take some initiatives on agriculture, given the fact that there's been sort of, I think at the end of the day, has been a sort of appreciation on the government's part that there are problems that the farmers are facing, and there are issues there. So if we recognize that the farmers are really facing problem, and many farmers are saying that agriculture is no longer a paying occupation, then both in terms of institutions and infrastructure, things have to be done. So, of course, on irrigation and all, again, Nitya mentioned there is additional spending that has been promised. But there are other, capital expenditure requirements of agriculture other than just irrigation, and where I felt that there should have been a greater degree of attention. Government is talking a lot about the farmer-producer organizations and strengthening the farmer-producer organizations, which is a good thing. Putting the farmer, empowering the farmer through these organizations. But then you need to, allocate resources to strengthen that these institutions. But you don't find adequate allocation being made. For instance, for agriculture, the allocation has been increased by about 5%. Again, in real terms, it's lesser than that. Health and health expenditure and education expenditure need to flag the very important issues that we face in this country. There's a huge deficit that we have in terms of learning, and now last 2 years things have become even worse. So there was a need to actually strengthen the school system and take it to the and slowly put it to the in a path of virtuous growth. But on education, there's no capital expenditure on creating new institutions. There's a little bit on higher education, but that also is not really meaningful. So the government is not thinking of brick and mortar in terms of education. I think everything is going to go online. Digitalization of education has been emphasized, but again, I need to mention quite clearly that digitalization has only increased inequity. So the inequity that he talked about has happened in general. Has actually got far bigger when it comes to providing education for people, and it has become extremely large thanks to this whole digitalization push. Health and family welfare expenditure has increased, even capital expenditure has increased, but the expenditure is mainly on creating more AIIMS, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and spreading this in other countries. What was really required was the primary health centers, and this is something that we have been saying from this platform year and year, repeatedly, that the infrastructure required by the common people, has to be strengthened, because we don't go to the hospitals in the first instance. So when we fall ill, the first thing that we do is to go to a neighborhood doctor. Hospitals come later. So unless this gap is filled, there's a huge gap out there, and which needs to be addressed. On NREGA and PDS, there are other colleagues who will obviously sort of contribute, and they have already flagged this issue. And I'll only say a couple of things, and I'll stop on the receipt side of it. The total receipts are expected to increase by less than 10%, and the tax receipts will also increase by a similar or 9.6% compared to the revised estimates. Now, possibly there is an element of underestimation, because if we accept government's numbers on the buoyancy on the GST front, and the way she also announced it in the budget that at GST record levels. So possibly there. Yeah, but every year I am curious. I get curious when I look at one of the annexes of the receipts budget, which gives numbers on incentives. Now we call it incentives. Earlier we used to call it revenue foregone. And there's one table. The first table relates to the corporate sector, and it gives the numbers on the range of profits that the top corporate sector makes, and of course the revenue generation from those corporates. There are about 9 lakh companies which do e-filing, and this is reported in the budget, in the annexure 7, and every year when I look at this number, I find that the companies who are reporting losses, or the companies who are saying we do not have any profits, that number is consistently increasing. This year, that number is 54%. So 54% of the companies, and these are large companies, these are all doing e-filing, are declaring that they do not have earned any profits, or they are running into losses. So obviously the question will come in all our minds, that why is the government letting go all these companies? Obviously there is something. If they're consistently, and this number was 35% in 2005-06, today is 54%. So there is something that is seriously going wrong with our revenue generation drive. So I'll stop here. I think I've taken longer than I should have. I didn't. I couldn't be responsible enough as the chair. But let me now invite Professor Atul Sharma, and we'll hear from Professor Sharma his views on the budget. Thank you very much.